Hello friends, and welcome to another episode of our podcast series, Conversations with Pav and Chitra. For those of you who are tuning in for the first time, you may want to check out our first episode to learn a little bit about what our podcast is about. But essentially, I'm Pav.
And I'm Chitra.
And we have conversations.
Well, as per usual, we're going to kick off with a fun fact, quote, or joke. And this time, Pav, it's your turn. So what do you have for us today?
Well, I've actually been overly ambitious and decided to give you a fun fact and a quote.
Fantastic.
My fun fact is that leaders can actually increase the market share, or good leaders can actually increase the market share of your company by 45%.
Interesting.
That's right. And my quote is that being a leader is not a position or title, it is action and example.
Wonderful. So I'm guessing the topic for today's episode is leadership.
You got it. We have a very inspirational leader with us today, and we have a lot to unpack with her. Her career in politics, her leadership style, the impact she has made to the Australian Indian community, as well as her passion for giving back to the community in general.
I can't wait to meet her. So I would love to introduce Charishma Kaliyanda. Charishma is a member for Liverpool in the New South Wales Parliament and the Parliamentary Secretary for Customer Service and Digital Government, Emergency Services and Youth Justice. She was raised, educated and has worked in southwest Sydney, and she was previously the counsellor in local government and a registered occupational therapist working in the youth mental health sector. Welcome on board.
Thank you so much, Chitra and Pavna, for having me on. This is a real honour, I have to say.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for being here. I thought maybe you could kick us off by talking to us a little bit about your background, where you grew up and what you were curious about.
Sure. So I have to start off by saying I was curious about everything. So I was actually born in India, in Bangalore. And when I was 4, my parents migrated to Liverpool here in Sydney. And that's where I've pretty much lived since then. And my family's always lived in southwest Sydney. But growing up, it was very interesting to see, all parts of Liverpool, actually all different communities coming together within Liverpool and southwestern Sydney. I like to call Liverpool a bit of a layer cake of migration. So within the area, you can actually see the influence of various waves of migration right from colonial times. And that presence is still there. And so I was really curious about the people that I went to school with, the people that I grew up with, my neighbours, my parents' colleagues, my friends, and where they came from, and how they were able to live their lives, obviously carrying all of the things that they were very proud of from their homelands or their home cultures, and how they were able to live their lives in Australia. And I think we're really lucky that we live in such a multicultural country, but also a country that is quite mature in its multiculturalism. So we allow and we are able to celebrate each other's backgrounds, traditions, cultures, but we also are able to bring that together and come together as one community. So that was something that I was really kind of interested in growing up, and that's something that I'm still interested in as the representative for the area.
Fantastic. So when you were growing up, and even now, given that there are very few South Asian politicians or Indian Australian politicians, what inspired you to go into that field and what drove you?
So it sounds a little bit corny, but if you had told me at 18, when I finished school, that I would be an elected representative or I would become a politician, I would have laughed at you. So it's not something that I intentionally set out to do or saw as an available career path when I was younger. And it's something that I kind of grew into as a result of people encouraging me, and as a result of really exploring some of those things that I was very interested in. So I got involved in representation and gained an interest for exploring politics when I was at university. there was a really big federal election campaign in the late 2000s that I started to get involved in, and I started to discuss the issues that people were interested in, the issues that affected people on a daily basis. And because of getting involved in organizations and interacting with people who were involved in politics, it just seemed like a natural thing to do in terms of going along to things. And this is where, when we talk about a journey, it starts with those steps, right? No one necessarily can assume or can predict where they will end up at the end of that journey, but it's about taking those opportunities when they're offered to you, taking a chance on attending things or being involved in things and engaged in things, and that's pretty much how I ended up in as an elected representative.
Amazing. I mean, politics in general is a very complex field or industry, I guess. What are some sort of main barriers that you faced as an Indian Australian in that or in this field of work?
So I would say the barriers are kind of on two sides of it.
Yep.
So the first is what you spoke about before in terms of not really having someone that looks like you, that may share similar experiences or a similar journey to you. And that's where sort of having that very supportive network around you can really help you overcome some of those challenges and ways that you might limit yourself. In terms of, well, I don't see anyone that looks like me or shares my experiences. So, but when you have people that encourage you to keep taking those steps or keep taking opportunities, it helps you overcome that. The second aspect in terms of challenges or barriers, I would say, is from the other side of things. So the impression of politics that we might see in South Asian communities or within, in my case, the Indian community, where I remember very clearly just before I was nominated to run for state parliament the first time, had a conversation with my mother and said, look, I've been encouraged to run for state parliament. What do you think? Should I do it? And her question to me was, will you be safe?
I can relate to
Yes.
that question. Great question, and she is your mom.
That's right. And you know what? It's a question that they might ask us, in response to a variety of different situations or circumstances, right? But for me, it was really interesting because the stereotype or the impression of being involved in politics in our home country is that it is not something accessible to your average person. It is not something that someone who just cares about the community gets involved in. The stereotype is a lot more cynical, it's a lot more negative, and it is it's quite different to what it is here. And so breaking through that impression of what it's like to be involved in politics and kind of changing changing that perception, I think, was also something that I was really mindful of very early on in my involvement.
Fantastic. So the topic for today is leadership. How would you define your leadership style?
So I would probably say, when you look at sort of some of the common models of leadership or the common approaches to leadership, I would probably subscribe to one that's a combination of servant leadership and authentic leadership. And part of the reason I say that is because one of my core values is community. So I firmly believe that when we come together, when we support each other as a broader community, we all succeed. We all gain from that. And so that's why I really sort of see value in collective approaches to resolving issues, progress, those sorts of things. And part of that, collectivism or approach to community is I don't think that or having an authoritarian approach or having a hierarchy necessarily is the best way that you can achieve progress in certain circumstances. So I would say that. And then in terms of being authentic, I feel like, there is so much that can be gained when you relate on a very human level with people. And you can actually shift people in a way that you may not necessarily if you tell them to do something. Whereas I've always found, sharing stories, connecting with people on that level can then enable them to sort of be persuaded or kind of come along with you on a journey in a way that sort of, taking that more authoritarian approach has just not quite worked.
Yeah, no, lovely. And look, you've touched on this. I was going to say, what really makes you an authentic leader, and you did say it's sort of really just relating on a human level and connection. If there is anything else that is really important, we'd love to hear, what that could be. But also, the other part of that question I had was the fact that you identify as an Indian Australian. Does that play out in your leadership style at all?
I think when you basically have multiple influences to your identity, that can make you a lot more patient. It can also make you really mindful of different perspectives and different approaches to various issues. And one of the things that I carry from my professional background, working in healthcare, is, for example, understanding the different ways that, say, families organize themselves, right? It sounds like a really basic thing, but when you, say, come from, whether it's an Indian Australian background, Lebanese Australian, Chinese Australian, you fundamentally understand that your family and your family dynamics may be very different to your neighbours' family dynamics, or your colleagues, or your, the teammate on your child's soccer team. And that means that when you make decisions, when you think about how they impact different people in your community, you account for those things.
Yeah.
So you get an understanding that one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah. All right. Well, now that you are a political leader, what are some of the policies that you've advocated for, particularly for the South Asian or the Indian Australian community?
So that's that was one of the tougher questions when I looked at it, because there are so many things that I'm quite passionate about, and I think it kind of intersects with not just the South Asian Australian community, but many. And I said before, when you take the time to really speak to people about their aspirations, hopes, dreams, the one thing that resonates with everyone is a desire for a better future for their children. And that comes across regardless of cultural background or what generation they may belong to in terms of their Australianness, if I can put it that way. And so in that respect, one of the things that I'm very excited about is obviously the new Western Sydney Airport, which will be a huge catalyst for opportunities for those of us in the southwest and the west of Sydney. And that is in terms of not just employment and business opportunities in terms of entrepreneurship and that sort of thing, but it's also in terms of our worldview. Something that I really reflect on is many thousands of years ago, the First Nations people were a multicultural and a multilingual society. When you travel through various parts of Australia, you would be exposed to different First Nations languages, First Nations customs and traditions. But in the last couple of 100 years, we've very much narrowed down into a very monolingual society. Whereas in Western Sydney, we are very proudly multicultural, multilingual. And I think when you think of the airport as an opportunity to open up to the rest of the world, we have a huge strength in Western Sydney. Where else can you say, regardless of what part of the world you want to do business in, we have someone that speaks your language, that understands your customs, that will understand those nuances of doing business with different types of people or different cultural groups and things like that. And I think we really need to lean into that. And that's something that I've proudly been working on sort of in the background. And when we think of the Western Sydney Airport, we think of not just particular sectors like logistics and transport and aviation, but Liverpool is also the home of a health and education precinct. And so again, those present real great opportunities. But going back to sort of my beliefs around making sure that when we look at progress, we're not just limiting progress to one section of society. We have to make sure that we take everyone along on that that journey for progress as well. So I know that whether it's here in Sydney or parts of our regions, there exist places where there are disadvantaged right next to places of extreme advantage, and so we really need to be looking at how we can even that out a little bit more and how we can spread opportunities to a broader cross-section of our community.
Yeah, that's amazing. Given your experience and I guess your passion for this field of work, and then you said you were curious about sort of diversity and bringing people closer together, even at a young age, I guess what would be your advice for young people who are probably contemplating politics as their future? And are there any sort of mentorships in this space available at all?
Those are very, very good questions. And first of all, if there are young people who are interested in getting involved in politics, I'm so excited. I'm cheering because I know just from speaking to different parts of our community that sometimes when you say that you're a politician, it's not the most sexy thing in the world. So so I really kind of celebrate young people who are interested in politics, because it's not just about the representation. It's not just about holding a certain title or a position. When you strip that back, these are young people who fundamentally care about what's happening in our broader community and society, and they want to have a voice in taking that further, in making sure that we all succeed. And so that is that sort of energy and that passion that I'd love to tap into and get them involved. But what I would love to, the advice that I would give to them is learn by doing, right? So, it's all well and good to kind of watch the TV shows, pay attention to what's happening on social media and listen to others and that sort of thing. But there is no better experience than actually, getting your feet on the ground, speaking to people and learning about politics right from the ground up, because fundamentally it's about how people relate to each other. Mm-hmm. So obviously we've got a federal election coming up this year, so there's plenty of opportunity to get involved by, whether it's getting involved in a campaign, speaking to your local member of parliament, or even looking at whether there's a political party or something like that catches your fancy that you can then kind of get a little bit more involved in. Learn by doing is probably what I would encourage people to do. In terms of mentorships, there's two ways of learning, right? There are established programs that train you according to a particular structure, and there are definitely those, particularly now that we see value in encouraging people who come from different cultural backgrounds, or women, or people of First Nations backgrounds. So people who are currently underrepresented within our sort of political structures. There are more programs tailored towards encouraging people from those backgrounds to get involved and actually kind of have the confidence to put their hand up, because I think one of the things that can happen when you don't see people that look like you or that have your experiences is the imposter syndrome starts to take hold, where you think, maybe this is not the type of work that I should be doing, or where I will be welcomed, or where I belong. And so those programs are really valuable for kind of tapping into that and helping people overcome that. But there's also informal ways of learning. And I have to say, most of the mentors that I have had, I have sort of developed that relationship more organically than through structured programs. And so they could be anyone in terms of, people who you look up to, people who are more involved or who've been around for a few years, and so you start having conversations with them and learning from their experiences and getting their advice on certain things, or those sorts of those sorts of interactions that are very fundamental what mentorship looks like. And in the political space, mentorships can be a little bit more tricky because there's always that underlying sense of, making sure that you trust people, making sure you sort of are very mindful about agendas and things like that.
Yes.
So there's and that's not to say that those considerations don't happen in other fields, because I imagine, whether you're working in corporate or government or any other sector, you always have to kind of think about whether there's anything underlying that that relationship, which is why I would probably have that experience of most of my mentors having found them through an organic process.
Good advice.
Fantastic. So in terms of, people like Pav and myself, we are not involved in politics directly, but we're really keen to be good citizens.
Yes.
So what does good citizenship look like, and what can people like me and her do?
So I think, again, great question, because I've been thinking about this a lot more when it comes to the various changes that we've seen in discussions about the way that various issues confront our society. And something that really concerns me is with the change to how we communicate with each other. For example, the rise of social media and the way that we, might be more vulnerable to things like misinformation and disinformation. I think what the building blocks of being a good citizen is building critical thinking and critical awareness skills. I know that's a little bit unexpected in terms of, in terms of me saying that, but I think we now live in a society that is very different to 20 or 30 years ago when we were growing up, when we were at school. And in some respects, the news that we were exposed to, the information that we consumed, was very much already moderated for us in terms of what was what could be trusted, what came from a valuable source, all of those sorts of things. Those filters don't exist to a large extent anymore, because we get most of our information from who knows where on social media, right? And when we don't have those skills in order to look at a source or look at some information and say, is this coming from a trusted source? Is this actually going to help my understanding of this particular issue? Is this actually a constructive way of engaging with, whatever issue it is? I think that has to be the foundation of being a good citizen. From there, you can then, get in, whether it's get involved in organisations, help out your neighbours or your friends or your children's sports teams, those sorts of things. Yes. Those all come from that fundamental bedrock of how we connect as a community. And something that really has concerned me over the last couple of years is because we have this fraying of our social cohesion, and there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation that gets circulated so quickly, it primes us to distrust each other. And it primes us to kind of not connect with our friends and neighbours and others who we share a community with. So we all have a vested interest in making sure that we protect the structures that keep our society going. Whereas at the moment, I think there is a little bit of tension around that, and I think what we can do is really work on those skills and build them in our children as well.
Yeah, exactly. We have a section in our podcast where we get a question for you from our previous guest.
Oh, so interesting.
So I will have to read it just to make sure I get it right.
Yes.
Our previous guest, Pradnya, asked if you had to single out one thing that you would most like to achieve during your time in Parliament, what would that be?
Oh my gosh. So I would probably have to say having a having youth infrastructure in my community.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that, more and more we obviously hear about in the news about, engaging young people, having that constructive pathway from, when people are young through to that development stage, and then, once they're out and able to make choices for themselves in the community. At the moment, one of the real challenges that I see in my community is there's aging recreational infrastructure. There's not a lot of money for programs. And so if we could rebuild some of that youth infrastructure to make sure that young people have the opportunity to, go to after-school programs, engage in sport, all of those sorts of things, that would be just really is something I would love to see. And especially at the moment where you have issues like cost of living really impacting people's capacity to put their children into sport or to dance or, other things that would really engage their mind and their creativity and really help them develop themselves as a person. When we see that flow-on impact on young people in our community, it then impacts them for a much longer time.
Yes, and it shapes the leaders of tomorrow.
It does. It really does. It really does. So, so that's probably an issue that's very close to my heart. But of course, there are a whole range of other things that I would love to see by the end of my time in Parliament.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Fantastic. Well, look, it's been such a pleasure having you with us. Thank you so much for your time for this conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Really enlightening.
Flown by.
It is so, I think we underestimate how important the work that you're doing is, and it's probably not appreciated as much as it should be. So thank you. Thank you for
your work.
And we're so proud of you.
We are, especially someone from a Kannada community as well who's come this far. We're really proud of you, and we look forward to your future achievements as well.
I'm so excited. Like I was saying to you before we started filming, I'm so excited for two young women exploring the achievements of others in our community, and through that also exploring the value of female friendships and things like that. I think this podcast has such a valuable space to play in terms of helping expose people to just the breadth of opportunities that exist out there, which is so exciting for me.
Thank you for your support, Charishma. Well, we really hope you enjoyed that episode. Look, we have so many key takeaways from that. It was such an inspirational conversation. But for me, I think two things that really hit the mark were learn by doing. So don't wait to sort of know everything before you give it a shot, and take the opportunity. Opportunities are, few and far between. So grab them when they're around. I think those two really struck a chord with me.
Yeah, great. And look, I think the one thing that stood out for me was this whole piece around authenticity. We want to be authentic in all aspects of life, whether it be as a parent, a teacher, at work, and being an authentic leader is very much spoken about. So be authentic. And the way in which Charisma said to do that was to connect with people really at a human level to make those connections real. So I love that.
So leadership is not just found in the parliament or in the office environment. Leadership is something that applies to all of us in our everyday lives.
That's right. It's about embracing who you are as a person, setting an example in your everyday life and leading by example, and also influencing those around you in a positive way.
We hope you found this episode inspirational, and we hope that you take away some of the behaviors and leadership traits that we talked about.
So that's it. From us, your hosts, Chitra and Pav,
signing off
until next time.